When the chandeliers of the Grand Legacy Ballroom shimmered against polished marble and velvet curtains, the night promised refinement and spectacle. The city's wealthiest elite had gathered in gowns and tuxedos, their laughter filling the air as crystal glasses chimed. Conversations weaved through the music of the orchestra, and each guest anticipated a night of elegance, brilliance, and performances worthy of their lofty expectations. The stage gleamed, the piano stood ready, and the entire evening felt like a portrait of perfection. But perfection, as they would soon learn, can be interrupted by something far more powerful. He entered quietly, not through the main doors, not with the confidence of those who belonged, but from the fringes of the hall. His clothes were torn, his shoes weathered and scuffed, his face marked by the harsh years of a life lived on the margins. He carried no program, wore no fine suit, bore no badge of belonging. To most in that ballroom, he was invisible. And yet, in the next moment, every eye would be upon him. As he approached the stage, a ripple of unease passed through the crowd. A homeless man, in a hall reserved for the elite. Murmurs spread like sparks. "What's he doing here?" someone whispered. A chuckle rose, followed by another. Within seconds, the ballroom shifted from elegance to mockery. To them, this man was a disruption, a mistake, perhaps even a joke. He stood before the grand piano. The polished surface reflected the chandeliers above, almost mocking the rough image of the man who dared to stand there. His hands hovered above the keys. He neither announced himself nor sought permission. He simply stood in silence, and that silence stretched long enough for the crowd to grow restless. Laughter returned, louder this time, confident in its judgment. They expected clumsy fumbling, a spectacle that would only confirm their prejudice. But what they expected was not what they received. Because beneath those ragged clothes was not simply a man of the streets. Beneath the weariness of his face was not just hunger and hardship. Buried deep, invisible to the eyes that mocked him, was something else. A memory of music, a legacy of practice, a devotion that had survived even when the rest of his life had crumbled. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and pressed a single key. The sound rang out, soft, fragile, like a whisper at first, but it carried through the hall with clarity that silenced the last of the chuckles. One note, then another, weaving into a melody that seemed almost too delicate to belong to the hands they had ridiculed. The conversations faltered, glasses lowered, laughter vanished, something in the air shifted, subtle yet undeniable. His fingers began to move, first slowly, then with growing confidence. The notes intertwined, forming a melody that was haunting and beautiful, a sound that reached past their ears and straight into their hearts. He was not playing to impress them. He was not performing for applause. He was speaking through the keys, telling a story in a language only the soul could understand. The music rose, each chord carrying weight, each measure resonating with the gravity of lived experience. His hands did not move with arrogance but with reverence, as though each key held a memory, each phrase carried a truth. The crowd leaned forward, caught between disbelief and awe. Only moments before, they had dismissed him. Now, they could not look away. For within the music, there was struggle. There was loss. There was pain, yes, but also endurance. Notes fell like raindrops on forgotten streets, like tears shed in silence. Then came chords that thundered like storms, anger, survival, defiance. And woven through it all was something more powerful still, hope. Hope that refused to vanish, hope that burned even when the world had turned its back. He played as though he had lived each note, as though every bar was carved into his being. The melody swelled, and the hall became a vessel for his voice. The chandeliers glittered, the air seemed to vibrate, and those who had once laughed now sat transfixed. The piano was no longer an instrument. It was a confession, a declaration, a reclamation. As his fingers moved faster, the music transformed. It rose like a river breaking its banks, unstoppable and fierce. His body swayed with it, not for show, but because the music demanded it. Notes cascaded, unstoppable, each one striking with precision born of years no one had cared to imagine. He was not fumbling, not guessing. He was masterful. He was extraordinary. And then, just as the storm seemed ready to consume the room, he shifted. The power softened, the fury calmed, the notes became tender, gentle, falling like snow upon the stunned silence. The storm gave way to stillness, and in that stillness lay forgiveness, grace, and beauty so raw it left the crowd breathless. No one spoke, no one dared, for they were no longer in a ballroom of wealth and luxury. They were in his story, a story of dreams buried but never forgotten. A story of nights spent alone, where melodies became his only companion. A story of hunger, of rejection, of resilience that refused to break. And as he played, they felt it all. They saw what they had missed. They realized what they had judged. Minutes passed, though to those watching it felt like only moments. The music carried them higher, then lowered them gently, as though he held their hearts in his hands and guided them with each phrase. The finale approached, not in a rush, not in haste, but in inevitability. His fingers slowed, the chords deepened, and the last note rang out, long, delicate, trembling in the air as though unwilling to leave. It lingered, and in that lingering note, the truth became undeniable. The silence that followed was complete. No cough, no murmur, no clink of glass. Only silence, reverent and heavy, as if the entire hall itself was holding its breath. And then, like a wave breaking, they rose. Applause erupted, not the polite kind given out of obligation, but thunderous, relentless, overwhelming. Cheers filled the room, tears fell freely, strangers turned to each other in disbelief. The very mouths that had mocked minutes earlier now cried out with admiration, with awe, with shame. They had been wrong, so very wrong. The man they had dismissed, the one they thought unworthy, had just given them a gift they would never forget. His music had stripped away their arrogance, shattered their assumptions, and left them humbled. He did not bow grandly. He did not soak in the glory. He simply lowered his head, humbly, silently, as though the ovation belonged not to him but to the music itself. He needed no words, no explanation. The piano had spoken for him, and it had spoken with a voice stronger than any speech. In that hall, on that night, the line between rich and poor, between belonging and exclusion, dissolved. Because greatness had walked among them, not in the form they expected, not in the package they valued, but in the hands of a man they had once overlooked. And as they cheered, as they cried, as they remembered, one truth settled deep within them: never judge a soul by its appearance, never dismiss a story by the cover it wears, because the most extraordinary power often comes from those the world has already cast aside. This is the story of how a single performance shattered assumptions, reclaimed dignity, and reminded everyone present, and everyone who hears it, what true greatness really means.